I read year-round for the craft of writing, editing, and publishing. And while there's editing software and apps like Pro Writing Aid, Hemingway, Grammarly, and AutoCrit, and now there's AI writing tools too that make some parts of the writing process easier, like Copy.ai and ChatGPT. You eventually have to come back to your work in progress and do your own rewriting. So in this video, I'll be sharing a few takeaways and tips from a few books that I've read about editing and revision. I'm Frank from One Black Perch Publishing, and this is the One Black Perch Publishing YouTube channel. First is The Artful Edit by Susan Bell. When I first picked this up, I was in the middle of my second rewrite of my novel, but also looking for something that I could refer back to when reading other authors' manuscripts, because I do some freelance editing. She uses Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald as a model to illustrate her techniques and approaches to editing. And I guess she's assuming that enough people who write are at least minimally familiar with The Great Gatsby. I've only read it once or twice, once in high school, I'm certain, and I believe once again in college or some other time after that. Each time required readings, I had no choice. The meat of her book lies in two sections: big picture of macro editing and the details of micro editing. Macro editing covers things like motif, theme, plot, continuity of tone, and then the micro details concern things regarding language like repetition of words and phrases, clarity, and active versus passive voice. Now, I found myself spending more time in the macro, where she talks about structure broken down into two parts that are rhythm and tension. She says that structure can give your story a beautiful form and save it from collapse. So one of her suggestions to address this is ask yourself, does your drama feel undramatic, to see if your work is collapsed? And if so, you can look to lengthen or shorten your path to it. Lengthen it if it feels abrupt, and shorten it if your tension feels like it's carried on too long. The way that she puts it is that a climax that culminates too early lacks tension and feels schematic or false, and too long of a lead-up can kill the reader's interest. Another point that she makes about structure concerns structural diagrams or visual guides that some writers use to help them through some of these processes. And another book about editing that I'm going to mention later uses a few structural diagrams that I happen to like, but she goes on to say that these diagrams may or may not help you understand the long-term rhythm of your work. So don't obsess over making like the perfect outline or starburst or planetary system of narrative elements, because at best they really reveal what your work, what your project underpins. At worst, they can distract you from the more crucial work of writing and editing your prose. And that's someone who does get derailed at times when I come across helpful things that may not be helpful at the time that I'm working on something. So I happen to resonate with this a lot. Better to have a forgiving structure and be tight with your words, as opposed to really tight with your structure and then end up strangling your story. The next book is DIY MFA by Gabriela Pereira. DIY MFA is exactly what it sounds like. It's like a curriculum, broken down as a curriculum that attempts to recreate customized MFA experience without attending a university. And chapter by chapter, she covers what's needed for a DIY MFA mindset, how to customize your learning, how to set goals, generate new ideas, how to read for your expertise. And then there's multiple chapters that provide guidance to building your writing community. So it's pretty comprehensive. So even if you've decided to make your writing life a professional endeavor for the first time, she makes a way forward that feels accessible and a little less scary. In regards to editing and making revisions, though, she dedicates one chapter and utilizes what she calls the revision pyramid. And this has 4 layers. And when she says layers, she really means revisions, or the amount of times you'll reread your manuscript with an eye out for a particular element. So that really means 4 revisions at the least. 1 is for narration, 1 is for characters, 1 is for reading to revise your plot, and then lastly, reading to revise your scenes. While there's not really an element of a book that you will want to ignore, giving life to characters that readers can invest in, care about, or root against, is a target that you really don't want to miss on, because it really doesn't matter how beautiful your narration is, how cleverly you subplotted your plots. If your reader doesn't care about the characters, then now she outlines a few questions to help develop characters, main or supporting. A few of them are, what do they want? What are the lengths necessary for them to get what they want? What are their obstacles? What are the stakes or the risk involved in pursuit? Will they lose something if they don't obtain what they want? Will they lose something even if they get what they want? You know, all serious questions that pertain to things outside of fiction too, obviously, right? And also, what are some changes that they may need to make, or the growth that they need to experience in order to get what they want in the midst of all this gaining and losing. She points out that supporting characters don't believe that they're supporting characters of their own life, so keep in mind that they believe that they're the hero in their own lives. They're not accessories to themselves. So a suggestion that she makes to make them feel more embodied is writing a few scenes of the main story from the supporting character's perspective, or write scenes that are beyond the scope of the main character's story arc. You know, what's happening in their lives while the main character's off saving the world or getting the girl or whatever your plot happens to be. Plus, those scenes can be useful later if you ever happen to write a companion novel or a standalone novel with your supporting character as a protagonist. You would have gotten some of this groundwork started already. You know, you see this a lot in Marvel Universe and other large-scale epics. I happen to like the idea of strengthening up supporting characters because it can make for an more emotionally charged dialogue, even if the language in the dialogue has, you know, subdued tones. She offers many more techniques and key points for the various aspects of your writing journey, so it is a book that you can come back to if you feel off base with your approach to writing. This is The Fiction Editor by Thomas McCormack. It's a short but insightful read for self-editing writers. Templates, diagrams, and other visuals are helpful, but getting familiar with the definitions and some craft terminology can really help you deliver on your intent without it feeling prescriptive and strict. For example, when diagnosing your draft, he characterizes faults in the text or opportunities in the text as dermal or internal. Dermal is surface issues like lazy cliches, problems with pacing, lack of fresh language that keep the reader's eyes moving. And internal problems include defects in the character's actions toward their purpose, like what you do needs to make sense toward your goal, right? Or a lack of interaction between characters, or a failure to fulfill promises made to the reader, in which is indicated in how you've set up the story. But how do you come to identify these internal, dermal, or other opportunities in your draft? It's what's called sensibility. McCormack, he devotes the first dozen or so pages to defining and clarifying what sensibility is, and really there isn't a more important definition provided in the book, since it's sensibility that editors really use to engage a manuscript and communicate with an author. It's also what authors employ when they're self-editing prior to making revisions. He calls it the apparatus within that reacts to what's immediately given. It's the sensor that feels fear, hope, curiosity, dismay, joy. That the ability to articulate the appropriate responses of your ideal reader is really the only valid measure of an editor's sensibility, or a writer's sensibility when they're self-editing. So to read and know that you're affected by a story, for instance, as you're reading it, is helpful to identifying what it is that you're registering and what you need to do about it. So having some degree of interoception, knowing what you're feeling, being able to locate an emotion that you're currently feeling helps a lot. So it's really good to develop that. What I expected was to get another strict framework to reverse engineer stories and their effects, because there are a lot of books that lay out so much for writers that you can almost paint by numbers and have a finished book. Those books have value too, but the fiction editor really isn't that. It's really just thoughtful guidance that can give you some clarification that you can go back to repeatedly. Now, the first three books I mentioned apply mainly to fiction, so the last book I want to share is actually great for editing nonfiction. How-tos, scholarly work, academic work, memoirs, novels, travel guides, self-help, inspiration, you know. It's Developmental Editing by Scott Norton. It's meticulous, and he offers modes of thinking that can help make an effective nonfiction text, because not all authors who seek to publish are writing fiction or poetry, right? You may want to solve real-world problems in a direct or practical way, lay out an argument for something that you're passionate about. Like last summer, while I was reading for self-discovery and personal development, I realized that I had nonfiction titles in me to write based on some of my personal experiences, and that I would need some guidance in pulling it all together. And developmental editing is what I ran into when I started looking around. And this is a source that I'm pretty sure I'll keep in reach for reference when I really buckle down and come back to those projects. There's chapters on how to rearrange passages for desired rhythm, how to use transitions at the beginning and end of chapters to affect the flow of the reading experience, how to weave seemingly unrelated strands or subtopics really into coherent narratives and arguments. But the first thing that Norton offers is his definition of developmental editing as the significant structuring or restructuring of a manuscript discourse. So that may mean giving broad direction by helping an author form the vision for your book and coach you through its execution. Some developmental editors suggest rewrites for specific sentences, which gets into line editing, but the chapters on the big picture planning, broader strokes, are what I found most pertinent for me. For instance, his chapter on thesis or finding the hook, he uses 3 criteria to measure or form a strong thesis. Those are point of view, originality, and relevance. Point of view is your special take of the material that you're covering. So if you're writing on a topic that's been published on often, the angle from which you approach it has to be clear and compelling. So even if you're writing something as personal as memoir, crafting a thesis with your unique perspective and experience can help in the drafting process, and that gives you a solid base and a direction that you can hold you accountable. The picture you're painting when you get off track. So in this chapter on transitions, though, he suggests combining the opening and closing sentences to each chapter to form a chapter thesis. Some may not even know that you need the chapter thesis in a nonfiction work. You know, I sure didn't before I read it, but you could appreciate a straightforward and simple approach for what can be a large undertaking, like self-editing your nonfiction work. So whether you're writing a book of methods to tap into your creativity, a path along your personal transformation, or change your daily habits towards a healthier lifestyle, there's a lot of ways of disseminating the information to the reader. Ultimately, you're still going to have to identify a point of view, craft a compelling argument, map out your research if research is necessary, and present it in a convincing way. And even more than that, to produce the best possible work, in developmental editing helps a ton with that. If you have book suggestions, put them in the comments. I'll add them to my reading list and maybe cover them here if I've read them before or after I've read them. If you find books on writing, editing, or creativity useful, subscribe to the channel. Oh, and share this video with your writer friends. Thanks for watching.